The first lie cost me 11 years of my life. "Tell them Grant was with you after 10, my mother whispered as my brother shoved his phone into my hands. "Delete whatever could confuse people." In my first life, I obeyed. A cyclist had been left injured on Ridge Road. Grant's SUV came back to our family dealership with a broken headlight, and my parents swore he had never been behind the wheel. Months later, when the truth surfaced, Grant said I had taken the car. My parents backed him. I lost my career, my family, and every chance to prove what really happened. Then I opened my eyes again in the dealership service bay. Same damaged SUV, same trembling brother, same phone in my hand. Dad said, "Ava, protect this family." This time, I looked past him at the investigator entering through the glass doors. I walked over and held out Grant's phone. "You should see this before anyone deletes it." In my first life, I believed the lie would last one night. Grant came back to Mercer Motors just after 10:30, with the front passenger side of the demo SUV crushed inward. He was shaking so badly, he dropped the keys twice. "I hit something on Ridge Road." "What?" "I don't know. A bike, maybe." My father arrived minutes later. He did not ask whether anyone was hurt. He looked at the vehicle and said, "Get it inside." Dad told the night technician the SUV had been damaged while being repositioned behind the dealership. Mum took me into her office. "Ava, Grant was with you after 10. "He wasn't?" "He is your brother." That sentence had controlled me my entire life. Grant made mistakes. I was the one expected to handle them. So when an investigator called the next morning, I said Grant had been at the dealership with me. Then Grant gave me his phone. There are messages that look bad. One showed him telling a friend he was taking the SUV up Ridge Road because he needed air before Dad started another speech. Another was sent minutes after the crash. I messed up. "Call me." I deleted both. That was the moment I stopped being someone who knew the truth and became part of the lie. Over the next few weeks, Dad asked me to correct small records. The vehicle movement sheet had the wrong return time. The damage report needed to show the SUV had been found that way in the back lot. A service entry had been opened under operations because, Dad said, insurance questions would be simpler if the repair looked routine. Each correction felt minor. Together, they built a story around me. Months later, the investigation reopened after the injured cyclist identified the model of the SUV. Mercer Motors was asked for vehicle records. The electronic key history showed operations. The repair order carried my department code. Several edits had been made from my office computer. Then Grant said something I never imagined hearing. Ava took the SUV. Then Dad placed the records on the conference table. Mum would not look at me. "You said he was with you," the investigator reminded me. "I lied to protect him." Grant shook his head. "No. You asked us to say I was with you because you were scared." I turned to my parents. "Tell them." Dad stared at the papers. Mum started crying. Neither spoke. Mercer Motors removed me from operations. People I worked beside for 10 years stopped answering my calls. My parents told relatives I was unstable and blaming Grant because I could not accept the consequences of my choices. I spent years trying to prove a truth I had personally helped erase. Only near the end of my life did one thought become unbearable. My family had not simply abandoned me when the lie collapsed. They had known from the beginning that if someone had to carry it, I was the easiest one to sacrifice. The first thing I noticed was the smell of hot metal, then the fluorescent lights, then Grant's phone in my hand. For a few seconds, my mind was still trapped 11 years ahead, inside the life I had lost. I looked down. No court papers or resignation letter. Just the cracked screen of Grant's phone and the dealership clock above the service doors. 10:41 p.m., the night of the crash. In my first life, I had agreed to lie before 11. By midnight, Dad had already started changing the vehicle records. By morning, the first version of the story had become the one everyone repeated. I looked toward the damaged SUV. The right headlight was shattered. Mud streaked the passenger side. One side mirror hung at an angle. Grant stood beside me, pale and breathing too fast. "Ava, I need you to delete 2 messages." Dad was on the phone across the bay. Mum was closing the blinds to the customer lounge. Everything was exactly where I remembered it. Except me. I opened Grant's phone. The messages were still there. One placed him on Ridge Road. The other showed he knew something had happened. In my first life, I erased both. This time, I locked the screen. Grant stared at me. "What are you doing?" "Nothing." He reached for the phone. I stepped back. That was the first decision. Not revenge, not accusation. Preservation. Before anyone could rewrite the records, move the car, or decide who would carry the blame, I would make sure the truth still existed. Then I heard the front doors open. The investigator had arrived early. The investigator stepped into the service bay, just as Dad ended his call. Grant moved first. Ava, give me my phone." I kept it in my hand. Mum came toward us. "Not here." I remembered those words. This time, I did not move. The investigator looked at the damaged SUV. "Who was driving this vehicle tonight?" Dad answered immediately. "It was returned damaged. We're still figuring that out." Grant looked at me. That was the signal. The same look he had given me in my first life, before I said he had been with me. Mum touched my arm. "Ava was here with Grant after 10. I stepped away from her hand. "No, he wasn't." The room went silent. Grant stared at me. "What? I was here. You weren't." Dad's voice hardened. "Ava, think carefully." "I am." I held out the phone. "Grant gave this to me and asked me to delete 2 messages. Grant lunged forward. "That's my property." The investigator did not reach for it immediately. "Are you voluntarily giving me the phone?" "Yes." Grant looked at Dad. "Do something." Dad turned to me instead. "This is a family matter. A damaged company vehicle came back after an accident. It stopped being a family matter when you started deciding what everyone should say." Mum's face tightened. "Your brother is scared." "So was I the first time you asked me to protect him." She did not understand what I meant. Grant understood the refusal. He had never seen it before. The investigator accepted the phone. Grant began talking too fast. "I drove up Ridge Road, but I didn't know I hit a person. I thought I clipped a barrier. I came back because the headlight was broken." Dad interrupted. "Stop talking." I looked at the SUV. The keys were still sitting on the service counter. In my first life, Dad had moved them before anyone documented who returned the vehicle. This time, I pointed toward them. "Those are the keys Grant brought in." Dad gave me a look I had seen my whole life. Disappointment. Not because I was wrong, because I was refusing the role assigned to me. Mum lowered her voice. You are going to regret humiliating your brother like this. No, I regretted helping him. Grant laughed bitterly. You think handing over one phone makes you innocent of whatever happens to this family? I'm not responsible for what happens because you told the truth too late. He stared at me. You'll fix this tomorrow. They believed I would wake up guilty, call the investigator, soften my statement, and repair the damage like I always had. Dad turned away. Take Ava off the morning opera's schedule. Mum looked shocked. Howard, she clearly needs time to decide whether she wants to be part of this family. For the first time, the threat did not frighten me, because removing me from operations meant something they had not considered. From that moment forward, every record they changed would be created without my access, and every lie would belong to them. By sunrise, Dad had disabled my access to Mercer Motors. My company email still worked, but my operations login did not. The scheduling system showed my shifts reassigned. My name had been removed from the vehicle release list. Mum called it temporary. Dad called it a consequence. I called it a clean line. Before leaving, I sent myself copies of my incident statement, the notice removing my access, and the time-stamped message, confirming I had not handled the damaged SUV after Grant returned it. Then I walked upstairs to the small apartment my parents kept above the dealership for late nights. I packed one suitcase, clothes, my laptop, a framed photograph of myself with Rosa Delgado from the year we opened the new service center. I left the family house key on the kitchen counter. Mum found me at the door. You're really moving out because your father took you off one schedule? I'm moving out because all three of you expected me to lie. We were trying to keep Grant from making one mistake worse. You were trying to make it belong to someone else. Her face changed. Ava, that is not fair. In my first life, I had spent years arguing about what was fair. This time, I picked up my suitcase. I'm not arguing. I rented a room across town and turned off the family group chat. For the first time in my adult life, no one at Mercer Motors could use my password, my desk, or my silence. At 8:17 a.m., Rosa called. Her voice was low. Did you open a repair order on Grant's SUV last night? No. It's under your department code. I sat up. What time? 10:36. My stomach tightened. At 10:36, Grant had not yet asked me to lie. My parents had not yet taken me into the office. Someone had already begun building the paperwork around me. Rosa continued. There's something else. I kept the handwritten intake sheet. I gripped the phone. Whose name is on it? She paused. Grant's. Rosa photographed the handwritten intake sheet before placing it back in the service file. I asked her not to remove anything. Not even the original? Especially not the original. In my first life, I had made the mistake of trying to rescue evidence after the story had already changed. This time, I wanted every version to remain where it had been created. The handwritten sheet showed Grant returning the SUV at 10:34 p.m. Damage noted, right headlight, passenger mirror, front side impact. His name appeared beside the key return. 2 minutes later, an electronic repair order had been opened under operations. My department, my code. But I had been in the showroom finishing month-end paperwork. Rosa had seen me there. One witness and one sheet were not enough. I spent the morning rebuilding my own timeline. I saved the message Dad sent at 10:39, asking me to come to the service bay. I kept the email confirming my removal from operations. I wrote down what I had personally seen before memory could blur into what I knew from my first life. Grant returning. The keys on the counter. The damaged SUV. His request to delete the phone messages. My parents asking for the alibi. Nothing more. I refused to fill the gaps with future knowledge. At noon, Rosa called again. The key sign-out book is weird. How? The paperbook says Grant took the demo SUV at 8:12, and the system, Operations Pool. No employee name. They were moving faster. I met Rosa at a coffee shop during her lunch break. She brought no company files, only what she could personally verify. Your dad asked me this morning if handwritten logs were still required, she said. What did you tell him? That we keep them because people forget to update the system. Did he ask for the book? Yes. I was no longer trying to stop them from doing something wrong. I was watching what they chose to do without me. Rosa leaned forward. You could take this to the board now. I could. Why don't you? Because right now I can prove someone opened a repair order under my department and that the records conflict. I can't prove who changed what or why. She studied me. You think there's more. I think accusing too early tells them exactly which records matter. Waiting carried risk, but confronting my father with half a pattern had destroyed me once already. So I protected what I could control. I sent the board secretary a written request confirming that I had no system access after 11:18 p.m. the night of the crash. I kept my phone records. I documented every contact from my family, and I began applying for operations jobs outside Mercer Motors. I had spent 12 years building that dealership. Leaving meant admitting I might never inherit any part of it. By late afternoon, Mom sent a family group message. Grant would resume his normal schedule. Dad wrote beneath it, "We are not letting one terrible night destroy this business." Then a dealership announcement went out. Grant would lead the weekend sales event as planned. His photograph remained on every banner. My name disappeared from the staff list. To everyone outside the family, Grant still looked protected and untouched. Then Rosa sent me one final message. Dad had asked for the original keybook, and for the first time since the crash, Rosa had refused to hand it over without a written request. By Saturday morning, Mercer Motors looked exactly the way my father wanted from the outside. Grant stood beneath the weekend sales banner, shaking hands with customers as though the damaged SUV had never existed. Dad stayed beside him, while Mum greeted long-time clients. My photograph had been removed from the management wall. Employees were told I had taken personal leave after a family disagreement. Grant even texted me, "When you're done proving a point, Dad will put you back on the schedule." I deleted nothing. I saved the message. Then I went to my first job interview outside Mercer Motors. For 2 hours, Grant had the dealership, Dad's approval, and the future successor role without me fixing what he missed. The first crack appeared before lunch. A technician refused to replace the handwritten damage intake with a new form. Dad told him the original contained confusing information. The technician refused to sign a second version describing damage he had not witnessed. The second crack came from the board secretary. My request confirming the time my system access ended had forced a simple question. Who opened the repair order at 10:36 p.m. under operations? No one could explain why it existed before I reached the service bay. Then Grant's phone became the third problem. The investigator asked him about the message sent after the crash. I messed up. Call me. Grant claimed it referred to an argument with Dad. The earlier message still placed him on Ridge Road. Mum called me that afternoon. This is getting worse because you won't help clarify things. I already clarified where I was. You know Grant panics. His messages sound more serious than they were. That is his explanation to give. She hung up, angry. The sales event still ended with strong numbers. Dad opened champagne, and Grant posted a family photograph. They believed they had survived the worst. Then Rosa called me. The board sent a written request for the original key log. I sat quietly. And your father? He told me not to release it until he reviews it first. This time, the board's request was already in writing, and so was his attempt to stand between them and the original record. The board received the original key log Monday morning. By noon, Dad called it incomplete. Grant called it outdated. Neither explanation changed the handwriting. 8:12 p.m. Demo SUV released to Grant Mercer. 10:34 p.m. Vehicle returned by Grant Mercer. Rosa had initialed both entries. The electronic system told a different story. At 10:36, the vehicle had been assigned to operations. 2 minutes before, Dad texted me to come downstairs. I studied the timestamps on the board copies. In my first life, I thought my parents had decided to sacrifice me only after the investigation became dangerous. I had been wrong. The story had started before I agreed to participate. The repair order made that clearer. Driver field, A. Mercer. Department, Operations. Damage location, rear service lot. No mention of Ridge Road. No mention of Grant. I looked at Rosa. Who opened this? I didn't. Could I have opened it from the showroom? You could have logged into the system from another workstation. But I didn't. She nodded. That's why I checked the activity record. The order had been created from the service manager terminal. Rosa had been outside documenting the SUV. Only 3 people had been inside the service office during those minutes. Dad, Mum, and Grant. My phone rang before I could speak. It was the board secretary. There's something else you should know. She kept her words careful. The investigator asked us to preserve communications related to the vehicle. My chest tightened. Grant's phone? Yes. She did not need to tell me everything. One message had been discussed with the board because it referenced company records. Grant had texted Dad shortly after returning. What do I put on the damage sheet? Dad's response came less than a minute later. Use operations. I'll handle Ava. I read those 6 words twice. Not ask Ava. Not explain it to Ava. Handle Ava. Mum had not yet given me the alibi. Grant had not yet handed me his phone. But Dad had already chosen my department. Already chosen my name as the place where the damaged vehicle would disappear. Rosa sat across from me in silence. Finally, she said, "Do you understand what this means?" Yes. Their first instinct had been to create distance between Grant and the car. I was that distance. That afternoon, the board requested every version of the vehicle record. Dad responded by announcing that internal confusion was being exaggerated by employees with personal grievances. Grant resumed client meetings. Mum called relatives before I could. By evening, people were already hearing that I had become bitter after being removed from Mercer Motors. The old story was beginning again. Only this time, they had a problem. I had never touched the records they were trying to put my name on, and the phone I refused to erase still remembered exactly when they decided I would. The first thing Grant lost was not his job. It was certainty. For years, everyone at Mercer's knew which problems came to me. Late vehicle transfers, missing keys, service delays, sales promises that operations could not realistically keep. Grant created urgency. I made it function. With me gone, those gaps became visible. 2 fleet customers complained that promised vehicles were not ready on time. A service manager refused to approve a release because the paperwork had conflicting names. One of Dad's oldest managers asked why operations no longer had a permanent lead. Dad told him I would return when I stopped making personal matters public. I did not return. Instead, I accepted a temporary operations contract with a regional delivery company. The job was smaller. No family name on the building. No office I had spent 12 years earning. But when my supervisor asked who had authorized a vehicle change, no one answered. "We're family. Just fix it." It felt strange. At Mercer Motors, the board's review expanded. The original keybook matched Rosa's handwritten intake. The electronic records did not. Grant's phone placed him on Ridge Road and showed Dad directing him to use operations on the damage sheet. Then another problem appeared. A sales employee remembered Grant returning through the rear gate that night. In my first life, nobody asked him until months later, when he claimed he was unsure. This time the question came while the memory was still fresh. Grant called me that evening. "You're enjoying this?" "No. You find it to watch me lose everything." "I'm working." He was quiet for a moment. Then his voice changed. "You know I didn't mean to hurt anyone. I know you left before finding out. I panicked. You kept panicking for days." He exhaled hard. Dad made the records worse. There it was. Not remorse. Distance. Grant was already separating himself from the man who had protected him. "What do you want from me?" "Tell the board I gave you the phone because I was scared, not because I wanted evidence deleted. You asked me to delete messages. I wasn't thinking clearly. That does not make the words disappear." He hung up. The next call came from Mum. This time she did not accuse me. She sounded tired. "Your father says the board may remove him temporarily." I said nothing. "And Grant may lose his position." Still nothing. "Ava, this company is your home too." That once would have broken me. Instead, I looked around my rented office. A plain desk, a cheap chair, a schedule with my own name at the top. "No," I said. "It was where I worked." Mum started crying. "We never wanted you blamed." I thought about the repair order opened under my department before they ever asked me to lie. Then why was my name already there? She had no answer. The following morning, Dad requested an emergency meeting with the board and senior staff. Grant would attend. So would Mum. And for the first time, they asked me to come not as their daughter. They asked me to come because they could no longer explain the records without me. The emergency meeting filled the upstairs conference room before 9. Every department head was there, along with board members who had once treated my father's word as final. Dad sat at the head of the table. Grant sat beside him. I took the empty chair across from them. Dad opened first. "We are here because a private family crisis has been misrepresented as deliberate misconduct." I placed the original key log on the table. "Then let's separate the family from the records." The paper log showed Grant taking the SUV at 8:12 p.m. and returning it at 10:34. Rosa confirmed both entries. Grant leaned forward. "Paper logs are imperfect. So are electronic ones." I placed the system printout beside it. At 10:36, the vehicle was reassigned to operations. "My department," 2 minutes before Dad texted me to come downstairs. Dad's expression hardened. That could have been an administrative shortcut. Then this should explain it. I read the message preserved from Grant's phone. "What do I put on the damage sheet?" Dad had answered. "Use operations. I'll handle Ava." No one spoke. I continued. At 10:39, he called me to the service bay. At 10:41, Grant asked me to delete messages from his phone. I refused. At 11:18, my access to operations was removed. I slid the access notice forward. Every record changed after that point was changed without me. Mum finally spoke. "We were terrified. That night was chaos." "I believe you. But fear doesn't explain why my department was chosen before anyone asked me what happened." Grant pushed back from the table. "You're making it sound like we planned to frame you. I'm showing the order of events." They could not argue with the order. The key record came first, then the damaged SUV, then the repair order under operations, then Dad's message, then their request for my alibi. The board chair looked at my father. "Why was Ava's department used?" Dad did not answer. Grant did. "He told me it would keep the car off my name until we figured things out." The room changed completely. I looked at the board. "I'm not asking anyone to punish my family for me. I'm asking whether people who alter records to protect themselves should control a company that depends on accurate records." Nobody looked at me as the daughter causing trouble. They looked at the timeline. And the timeline did not need me to defend it. After the meeting, Dad asked everyone to leave. Grant stayed near the window. Mum closed the conference room door. For a moment, nobody spoke. Then Dad looked at me. "You proved your point." "No, the records did." His jaw tightened. "If the board removes me and Grant, Mercer Motors may not survive." Mum stepped closer. "Ava, please. Tell them your father was protecting the company, not framing you." Grant turned around. "And tell them I gave you the phone because I was panicking. That part is true." I looked at the 3 people I had spent my first life protecting. "You want me to explain your choices so they sound better?" Mum's eyes filled. "We are still your family. That was never the problem." I picked up my coat. "The problem was that being family always meant I was expected to carry what the rest of you dropped." Grant said my name. I stopped at the door. "I'm not asking you to forgive me." "No," I said. "You're asking me to save you from being believed." Then I opened the door. For the first time, I left before anyone could hand me another version of the truth to carry. 1 year later, I managed operations for a regional fleet company across town. No Mercer name on the building. No family photographs in the lobby. Just work that belonged to the people who actually did it. Every morning, I checked the vehicle board before the first drivers arrived. Each key hung beneath one name, one driver, one time, one responsibility. My supervisor handed me a new route schedule. Everything good? I looked at the board. For years I had believed being dependable meant carrying whatever my family refused to hold. Now I knew better. I signed my own name at the bottom of the schedule and handed it back. Everything's clear. And for once, clear was enough.